Chapter 6: The Truth About BDS. On December 4th, 2020, Time magazine published an article partially entitled, "Here's What You Need to Know About BDS" by Sanya Mansour. BDS stands for the demand to boycott, divest from, and sanction Israel. The timepiece pretends to give an objective look at the controversial movement to treat Israel as a pariah state. In reality, the article provides a one-sided, inaccurate reading more like a press release for the BDS movement than an informative piece of journalism. It turns out that all you need to know leaves out substantial, important information. Here is an accurate description of BDS's history, goals, and philosophy. How did BDS start? BDS advocates claim that it began in 2005 with a group of Palestinian civil society organizations, and that is a Palestinian-led movement. In fact, the strategy emerged in 2001 during the NGO forum of the infamous Durban Conference, the United Nations World Conference Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance, an event so anti-Israel and anti-Semitic that even the conference Secretary General, Mary Robinson, admitted that it included horrible anti-Semitism. The NGO Forum published a lengthy statement, of which paragraphs 424 and 425 form the blueprint for the BDS movement launched 4 years later. Quote, 424. Call for the launch of an international anti-Israeli apartheid movement as implemented against South African apartheid through a global solidarity campaign network of international civil society, UN bodies and agencies, business communities. 425. Call upon the international community to impose a policy of complete and total isolation of Israel as an apartheid state, as in the case of South Africa, which means the imposition of mandatory and comprehensive sanctions and embargoes, the full cessation of all links, diplomatic, economic, social, aid, military cooperation and training, between all states and Israel." End quote. This wasn't the first boycott against Jews in the Middle East. The League of Arab States launched a boycott of Jewish-owned businesses in the Middle East in 1945 that remains in force today in Syria and Lebanon. There were boycotts of Jews before then, during the 1936-39 Arab riots, and even before that. The earliest example I have found was a boycott against Jewish businesses in Hebron in 1909. What are BDS's goals? The movement claims no official position on one state versus two states in the area of the former British Mandate Palestine. However, it demands that this so-called right of return for descendants of Palestinians displaced in the 1948 war, a right that simply doesn't exist anywhere else. World War II and its aftermath displaced between 10 and 20 million people, but no one serious claims their descendants have a right to return to their ancestors' homes. The so-called right of return has kept Palestinians stateless and without protection for over 7 decades. Arab leaders have candidly designated them as cannon fodder against Israel. It is one unyielding demand by the Palestinians, not to have the Palestinian diaspora come build a Palestinian state, but to have them return to Israel by the millions and ensure an Arab majority there. In short, BDS does not, cannot, accept the concept of a Jewish state. It accepts one Arab majority state or 2 Arab majority states, but vehemently opposes the existence of any Jewish state, even as dozens of states define themselves as Arab and or Muslim states without anyone accusing them of apartheid or racism. Is BDS anti-Semitic? BDS leaders insist they are not anti-Semitic. However, their demand for return and their refusal to accept Jewish self-determination while insisting on Palestinian self-determination shows they discriminate against Jews. Beyond that, the BDS movement and their allies on the far left insist on holding Jews to standards to which they hold no one else. Jews who wish to become leaders in feminist, LGBTQ, or other causes must renounce Zionism, the right of Jews to a homeland of their own. Jews who want to become student leaders face interrogation to see if they support Israel's existence, and saying they do makes them suspect at best, disqualified at worst. Israeli Jews who want to speak on campus likewise face litmus tests for the simple right to speak. BDS says that they want the world to boycott Israeli businesses, but in fact, BDS groups target only Jewish-owned Israeli businesses for boycott. Even though Arabs own businesses in Israel and in the disputed territories, BDS only targets Jewish businesses. Moreover, at least one BDS organization today markets Israeli wine made from grapes grown in Israel because it is owned by Arab Christians. The BDS movement assumes any Jewish company violates human rights, but those from Israeli non-Jews they call Palestinian are wonderful. It was always a boycott against Jews. For all practical purposes, BDS is an anti-Jewish movement. Even the German parliament recognizes this, having declared BDS anti-Semitic in 2019. They know a thing or two about what boycotting Jewish businesses looks like. Is BDS pro-Palestinian? The BDS movement claims it follows the will of the Palestinian people, listing some 170 civil society organizations, many of which consisted of only one or two people, that signed on in 2005. Ilan Pappé, a prominent BDS supporter and critic of Israel, has candidly admitted that the claim that Palestinians created the BDS movement is not really true, but it is important to maintain that fiction, quote, for historical records, end quote. The BDS movement and its leaders have little to say about improving Palestinian lives, no matter where they live. In fact, they have consistently opposed anything that could make Palestinian lives better, such as building them permanent homes or lobbying to allow them to become citizens of host states such as Lebanon. They consider Palestinian misery more valuable than Palestinian contentment. It goes without saying that most Palestinians do not boycott Israeli goods themselves, including luxuries such as chocolates and ice cream. Palestinians also shop in Israeli markets in the territories. The highest-paying Palestinians work for Israelis, with an average income double what they can make domestically, according to the Palestinian Central Bureau of Statistics. A significant part of the Palestinian economy depends on workers in Israel. BDS wants all these people to lose their jobs with no plan for new jobs to replace them. In fact, when BDS pressure succeeded in getting SodaStream to move its factory from the West Bank to the Negev, hundreds of Palestinians lost their well-paying jobs. BDS leaders were ecstatic at this victory. Given the assumption that Israel will not get destroyed in the foreseeable future, BDS advocates must choose: work towards helping Palestinians within this reality, or work towards the destruction of Israel anyway, to the detriment of the people they claim to represent. In recent years, many Arabs have chosen the former path. Invariably, BDS chooses the latter. BDS disregard for actual Palestinian welfare goes well beyond Israel and the territories. Palestinians in Lebanon who have lived there since the 1950s are barred, by law, from many jobs. They cannot buy land. They cannot build new housing, even in overcrowded camps. Yet one would be hard-pressed to find a BDS advocate who demands that Lebanon offer basic human rights protections to their Palestinian residents. On the contrary, Lebanese bigotry against Palestinians is ignored and silenced, since the BDS narrative sees Israel as the only evil that may be discussed. Even more horribly, during the first months of the Syria civil war, Israel offered to allow Syrians of Palestinian heritage to move to the West Bank to save their lives, on one condition: that they forego the so-called right of return to Israel proper. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas angrily rejected the offer, saying it was better for the Palestinians in Syria to die there. He didn't offer the Palestinians of Syria a choice of their own, but made it for them. No BDS group objected to a decision that contributed to the deaths of thousands of Palestinians in Syria. BDS doesn't give a damn about Palestinians. Like the Arab world for decades, they choose to use Palestinians to attack Israel. Does BDS support peace? BDS advocates emphatically oppose any peace initiatives that treat Israeli Jews as human beings. They denounce anyone who participates in peace initiatives, whether it involves bereaved Israeli and Palestinian mothers speaking to each other, or joint sports programs for Palestinian and Israeli youth. The Muslim Leadership Initiative, which allows Muslims to learn Israel's point of view, saw its participants boycotted by the BDS leaders. BDS intransigence extends even beyond that. When popular artists decide to perform in Israel, while the BDS movement officially doesn't support threats, their members most certainly do. Some artists are bullied into canceling their shows, and the BDS movement celebrates these as victories. Do American Jews support BDS? BDS advocates claim they have dozens of Jewish progressive organizations on their side and use them as proof that they are not anti-Semitic. Yet every poll shows a minuscule number of anti-Zionist Jews in the U.S. A 2018 Mellman poll of Jewish voters found that while numerous Jewish Americans have plenty of criticisms of Israel, only 3% of them self-identified as generally not pro-Israel. Although the question wasn't asked of that minority, many or most of that 3% would not identify as being actively anti-Zionist. It can be assumed that only those very few who self-identify as anti-Zionist would wholeheartedly support BDS. While anti-Zionist Jewish groups such as Jewish Voice for Peace and If Not Now manage to get substantial press relative to their actual numbers, they occupy only the fringes of U.S. Jewish life today, and their influence among Jews is similar to the all-but-forgotten anti-Zionist American Council for Judaism, an anti-Zionist group that likewise gained much press coverage but few adherents in the 1950s. What are the real goals of BDS? The media keeps getting BDS wrong. Liam Hoare wrote in the foreword, quote, BDS is a failed political movement, and the Israeli government stalks a tiger that walks on paper feet. In 14 years, BDS has failed to attract support beyond those who were already inclined to dislike Israel to begin with, and has made no perceptible impact on the Israeli economy, end quote. Like so many others, Hoare misses the point of BDS. BDSers admit that they choose their targets of boycott for maximum leverage and publicity, even as they use Israeli products themselves. The boycotts form a sideshow to their real aim, to have average people associate Israel with racism and apartheid. By repeating the lies that Zionism is racism, or that Israel is an apartheid state, or Israel must be boycotted for human rights abuses, and so on, over and over again, it makes an impression on college students and people who don't follow Israel closely. When an artist chooses to boycott Israel, it makes an impression on people who want to identify as supporting social justice. When an academic group calls to boycott Israel, it lends an aura of respectability to hating Israel. That's the real goal of BDS. They want to make the very idea of being pro-Israel toxic. They want to put proud Zionists on the defensive. They want to make people question any dealing with Israel as immoral. In that respect, they have succeeded. Every time a college student hesitates before defending Israel publicly because of the very real potential personal consequences, BDS wins. Here is one perfect example of a BDS victory, one that in terms of boycotts is minor, but in terms of the real goals of BDS represents a huge win. In July 2019, a European academic association named European Network for Mental Health Service Evaluation reportedly canceled a planned 2021 conference in Israel due to fear it would come under pressure from the BDS campaign. The organization's head admitted he canceled the conference in Israel to preempt BDSers threatening him and to stop the organization of getting distracted by BDS. This organization didn't choose to drop its conference in Israel because it is anti-Israel. It chose to boycott Israel because it didn't want 2 years of anti-Israel fanatics harassing its members. Just as we saw in the 1970s, where the fear by European nations of Palestinian terrorism quickly morphed into a pretense that they support Palestinian nationalism, people don't consider themselves susceptible to blackmail. It is much easier to feign idealism and to change from sniveling coward to heroic defender of justice. The constant threats by the Israel haters, along with the drumbeat of so-called social justice warriors who push the lie that anti-Israel means progressive, generate a toxic environment that erodes and derides public support for Israel. It creates a space where public opposition to Israel becomes a point of pride. That fear represents the biggest BDS victory, and it is not yet being effectively countered. If terrorism aims to instill fear in people and force them to act in ways that they don't want to, then BDS is a terrorist movement. BDS has already won in many venues. Any college, any European capital, where a pro-Israel demonstration can expect attack is a BDS victory. Similarly, every time liberal Jews say that they are pro-Israel, but, and they emphasize the but more than their supposed love for Israel itself, BDS has won. It doesn't have to be this way, even for people critical of Israel's policies or government. Plenty of people are passionate critics of Israel's government, yet are more passionate in their defense of Israel. They are as liberal as can be. They criticize Israel when appropriate, but their overwhelming love for the country and ability to look at it in perspective shows what Zionism from the progressive side can look like. Is BDS successful? By the standard of economic or diplomatic harm to Israel, the answer is clearly no. Israel's economic growth is the envy of the world. It has relations with more nations than ever before. Israel's exports break records each year, and Israel creates large numbers of unicorn startups. Politically, only in the UN is Israel still something of a pariah. Yet using the yardstick of whether BDS has managed to demonize Israel in the eyes of the world since 2001, the answer is certainly yes. After all, the same Time magazine article quoted BDS leaders, without comment, saying flatly that Israel is a racist and apartheid state, an absurdity given that some 20% of Israeli citizens are non-Jews, mostly Arabs. They have equal rights under the law and enjoy more freedom than anyone living under Arab rule. When major media parrot false or contested BDS claims as facts without checking, it shows the success of BDS attempts to brainwash the world to hate Israel, especially the youth. Ironically, the same Arab world that began by boycotting Jews in Israel in the first place poses the biggest threat to BDS today. Israel's treaties with Morocco, the UAE, and Bahrain, along with unofficial ties with Saudi Arabia and other Sunni Arab states, has hurt BDS in its claims of offering the only solution. Emiratis walking around Tel Aviv and enjoying the company of Zionist Jews, while still working to help Palestinians, reveal a model of peace and prosperity that is transforming the Middle East, a model that renders BDS not only irrelevant, but positively backwards. BDS is not progressive. It does not support peace, and it is increasingly aligned only with Iran and its allies. This is the truth about BDS that its adherents don't want the world to know.